Hello and welcome to Beyond Business on France 24, the programme where we look at how countries and companies compete in the global economy. Now, we all know that governments, businesses, banks and, of course, lately ratings agencies have huge power to change various aspects of our lives. To a certain extent, we are happy to put the decision-making in the hands of either elected officials or trusted experts. But what about the unelected, unexpert actors on the world stage? The film stars, pop stars and other well-known names who turn up in crisis zones and whisper in politicians' ears. Well, today on Beyond Business, we're looking into so-called celebrity diplomacy, its benefits and its pitfalls. In just a few minutes, we'll be hearing from an expert in this field, Professor Andrew F. Cooper from the University of Waterloo in Canada. But first, let's take you back a couple of months to Libya to meet one well-known Frenchman who firmly believes it was his personal influence that led to last year's historic regime change.
Libya, April 2011. 1 month after NATO took command of military air operations, French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy arrives in the rebel stronghold of Benghazi to celebrate the Franco-British initiative.
It's the same fight for freedom and against dictatorship.
If you ask Lévy, he's the man responsible for the NATO campaign in Libya. In his opinion, were it not for his personal phone calls to Nicolas Sarkozy, perhaps the French president would never have been the first to recognize the rebel government known as the CNT.
Since March, I told Sarkozy to receive the NTC so they could be officially recognized. Whether it's wrong or right, I have the feeling that as few people as possible should be kept in the shadows. That's all, and then there were European partners, French diplomats and ministers. Because I remember how some were with Bosnia and how others were with Rwanda. Europe has struggled to create a shared policy on serious matters like these. And I said to myself, if we're going to save Benghazi, it's a choice, a wager. It's up to Sarkozy or no one.
And so it was. Lévy and not French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé was alongside Sarkozy and British Prime Minister David Cameron during an official visit to Benghazi in September.
Clearly, I played a lot of different roles over those 8 months that are unconventional for a writer. But it seemed to me that the circumstances required it.
Lévy is part of a trend that sees people using their celebrity status to advance a cause. Some argue it's more effective than conventional diplomacy as they're in the field visiting the affected people. Wyclef Jean, Shakira and Sean Penn all visited Haiti after it was ravaged by an earthquake. Penn later went to Libya. Angelina Jolie's visits to refugee camps in Iraq and Somalia are also well documented. Their high profiles have brought much-needed attention to these issues in a way that standard diplomatic cables cannot.
You think that the international community needs to understand something that they don't know about what is happening in Somalia or what is happening here?
George Clooney has challenged policymakers to respond to the Darfur crisis. In 2008, he shared the podium with U.S. President Barack Obama. 2 years ago, he urged for the United Nations Security Council to intervene in Sudan.
My job is to come here today and to beg you on behalf of the millions of people who will die, and make no mistake, they will die, for you to take real and effective measures to put an end to this.
Perhaps the most widely seen celebrity-turned-activist is U2 singer Bono. Since the 90s, he's been rallying world leaders to join his fight against poverty in Africa. Chirac, Blair, Bush, and even the Pope, he's met with each face-to-face. The singer created a series of videos campaigning against famine in the Horn of Africa. Ivorian singer Tikenja Fakoly was one of the many artists that appeared in the videos.
The purpose of the video is to tell world leaders and the United Nations that in Somalia people are still dying, and it is possible to change that. It's possible to do something.
In 2008, with Bono's help, the G8 wiped out debt for 18 African countries, a sign that this new breed of diplomacy can produce results, and perhaps that conventional diplomacy is not so effective.
OK, well, let's bring in our studio expert now, Professor Andrew F. Cooper from the University of Waterloo in Canada. He's a specialist in conventional and unconventional forms of international relations, and he's written about the subject in his book, Celebrity Diplomacy. Thanks very much for being with us here on France 24.
Pleasure to be with you.
Well, let's start off with a kind of a general question. This is a very divisive subject, it would seem. Some people think it's a great way to promote a cause. Other people think it's just a great way to promote a celebrity. Is it simply one or the other?
Well, I think you can talk about the amateurs, but I don't think in the screen that we've seen, these are the amateurs. I think all of them are very professional. Celebrity diplomats, celebrity advocates. Bono, very much at the top of the list, right? He's networked with everybody. Diplomats, G8 leaders, G20 leaders now, but also, of course, with the business community, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. This is not amateurism. And of course, this is one of the fascinations about the topic, but also one of the challenges for traditional diplomats.
Well, like you say, a lot of these people are certainly making somewhat of a shadow career out of their diplomat side. But maybe they might be a little out of their depth. Don't you need some kind of specialist knowledge to talk about famine or about national debt?
This is one of the difficulties. And of course, once more, you have the sort of amateurs that are very much out of their depth. You had Ginger Spice going off, from the Spice Girls going off to the Philippines as a UN representative. And of course, many other celebrities that want to do and sort of signal that they're going to go off and save parts of Africa. But again, the people that we're interested in this conversation are not like that. They not only are very knowledgeable themselves, but they have a lot of people around them that sort of advise them and keep them away from trouble. I mean, Angelina is an interesting example. Angelina, from her sort of personal life, you would expect her to have all sorts of faux pas. But in her sort of, as you say, the shadow life, the public, celebrity, diplomat life, very few steps taken wrong. She's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Once more, certainly somebody who, before she speaks, has guides along the way.
And let's take another example of somebody that you would call one of the big players in this kind of circle, Bono, who we saw in the report just there, convincing the G8 to cancel the debt of several other countries. Now, that is an absolutely huge thing. Surely can't be seen as just gloss. How would he achieve that?
I think it's the insider-outsider. Outside, of course, as we know from going back to the 1980s, there's a whole tradition of having concerts. Certainly Bono in the G8 context, not only in sort of the ones that are sort of famous, the Live 8 concert, but in places like Rostock, in terms of the Highland Dam G8, we see Bono sort of having these huge crowds and sort of having a message to the faithful. But combining that, and I think this is the real difference with the past in terms of access. Access that's sort of non-threatening, so he can get in on the inner circle of Tony Blair or George W. Bush. He plays to sort of a religiosity or a spiritual nature, readings from the Bible. So again, conservative Congress people in the U.S. are not sort of threatened by that challenge. And once more, this is sort of a unique focus. Whether other people can do this, we're unclear. But I think Bono at the top of his game, and of course maybe now there's a little bit of Bono fatigue, at the top of his game, he's extremely good.
For sure. He's certainly been very visible in this kind of arena for quite a long time, like you say. But if we move on to a more complicated example, one that's certainly more controversial here in France, Bernard-Henri Lévy, who we saw in that report, BHL, or BHL as he's known. Now, he's the French personality who believes that he convinced the French president to join the NATO bombing campaign or start the NATO bombing campaign in Libya. Now, if it is true that his phone call to the president made that difference, surely that is actually quite a scary prospect, not to say undemocratic.
Yeah, undemocratic, but quick. So I guess if you're really of the school that says, diplomacy should be about intensity, about making decisions, even perhaps going around established diplomatic circles, including, of course, in France, the foreign minister. And the foreign minister was sort of talking about celebrity diplomacy in a very pejorative way, that this was sort of, again, celebrity by amateurs. But the phone call was, to be fair to BHL, after going to Libya, sort of, getting on the back of a truck with rebels, going to Benghazi. So there's a sense of being in the front lines. And of course, this is part of the mystique of BHL, or indeed public intellectuals taking on this role, that they spend all their time inside writing books, 19, 20 books, and then some of them at least, and whether this is the train or not, they can get and be on the front lines and see as agents of change.
Well, in the report, we were talking about how conventional diplomacy might be muscled out in some sense, but surely that's not possible. Conventional diplomacy has a huge history. It's sort of how things work. Mm-hmm. Is there a chance, though, that celebrity diplomacy will change how conventional diplomacy works? There'll be some kind of intermeshing of the two?
I think that's the problem for traditional diplomats. Many, of course, are skilled, they're from the guild, they have an apprenticeship, but at the same time, their usual manner of working is behind closed doors, quiet diplomacy, part of the club as opposed to the network. And this is why, at least for the people that criticize celebrity diplomacy, are so worried, because it's not a club. It's very much this network of groups, of individuals around the world. Even the connection with Sudan and Darfur and in East Africa. I mean, there's always sort of new people to be brought into the network, right? Other celebrities from different parts of Africa that are really transnational. And of course, this is not the traditional technique for diplomats. It's very national, the reason of state. So once more, it's a challenge. It's a threat to these sort of club-oriented diplomats.
Okay, so we're perhaps looking at a change in motion with celebrities having more influence on the traditional stage. Well, very interesting subject. Thank you very much for coming in to see us, Professor Andrew F. Cooper from the University of Waterloo in Canada. That's all we've got time for on this edition of Beyond Business. Thanks very much for being with us. You can, of course, check out this programme and all of our other programmes on our website. That's france24.com. For now, though, do stay tuned to France 24.